Family Time 157. We're talking about framing. We're still looking at self-management. And framing is really a way of taking control of our perceptions. Our perceptions are our realities. That's how two people can experience something very similar and have totally different reactions to that very similar experience. We're all the products of our innate interests and values, of our backgrounds. That all affects how we see the world and interact with the world. It's important for us to recognize, though, that we have control over the way we view things, over our perceptions. And too often, we're willing to give up that ability. We think, oh, this situation, this person, this thing makes me mad, or it makes me stressed, or it makes me nervous. The more we can accept that situation or that person is just a separate thing. It just is what it is. And that our perception, our reaction, our relationship to that thing is what gives us the impression that it's sad or funny or angry or happy. Those are all constructs, and that's all part of our perception. Once we start to take ownership of our perceptions, we can change them. We can use them. They can become tools. A simple example would be something that we think is a negative thing in the moment. Let's say we're running late for school or work, and we get stuck at a train track, railroad crossing. Well, now we're even later. And we may think this is a negative thing. We've decided to take this as a negative thing. And being late is probably not a positive thing. It's not something that we want to do frequently. That could have other consequences. But in that moment, we're going to choose to be frustrated. We're going to choose to be angry. A lot of people think it's not a choice, but we're giving up a strength that we have, an ability that we have. We're giving up our freedom to choose. We're deciding, I'm going to be angry about this situation. But our anger, our frustration, doesn't do anything to change it. Doesn't make the train go faster. Doesn't roll back time and get us up earlier when we should have gotten out of bed instead of hitting the snooze. So now we're just ruining the moment. We're potentially putting ourselves in a situation where we're not making as many clear-headed decisions because we're choosing to have an emotional reaction and be frustrated. And we're probably going to negatively impact future moments. We may get to school or work and then be frustrated and then have a more negative interaction with people when we get there. We could instead choose to reframe the situation and acknowledge the fact that we don't really know what would have happened, what would have been different if we had missed that train. Perhaps if we had been there 5 minutes earlier and missed the train, we might have gotten in an automobile accident, and that would have been a much worse situation. Is that likely? Not necessarily. But we can choose to frame it however we want. We can decide that perhaps this was a lucky thing that we met this train and were delayed a little bit. I always try to do that with my own kids. When we have something that kind of goes wrong, something unplanned for, I just call it an adventure. It's like, oh, it's another adventure. That's how I choose to frame it. Is that it's not a problem, it's an adventure. Because part of having an adventure is the unknown. That's what makes it fun. That's what makes it interesting, is that we don't exactly know what's going to happen. It's an adventure. And if you can frame things in that way, you don't need to frame it the same way as I do. But if you can start to frame potentially negative things in a positive light, it totally changes the way that we're able to interact with those situations or those people. You might have an interaction with somebody, a relationship with somebody who maybe gets on your nerves, certain behaviors that they have. And you can choose to just think negative things about that person and say, oh, this person does this, and think it's because of selfish motives. Or you can decide to reframe it. Try to look at things from that person's perspective. And that's something we'll get into more when we talk more about empathy. But we can decide to try to look at things, reframe, try to take a glance at where the other person might be coming from, and then maybe say, okay, well, maybe that person is making this decision based on this. A saying that I heard is, it's better to not chalk something up to malice that could just as easily be attributed to ignorance. That maybe somebody wasn't doing something to us because they were trying to be hurtful, but maybe they just didn't understand. Maybe it was their ignorance in the situation. They weren't reading the room, whatever it was. And that makes it a little bit easier for us to relate to other people, to create more positive interactions. So that's what I want you to do this week, is I want you to take something, hopefully something in your life right now, that you might view as a potentially negative situation. I want you to recognize that it being a negative situation, a stressful situation, that is our perspective. That doesn't necessarily mean it's reality. The situation, the event, is just that thing. And there's no inherent positive or negative value with an event, with an occurrence, with a situation. We have to decide what we want to attribute to it. So I want you to try to reframe that potentially negative thing and think of how you could frame it in a positive light. Whether it's a situation, whether it's an interaction with a person, how can you reframe that? And it's something you have to practice like anything else. It's not going to come easily. But if you can practice on reframing, you can change how you see and then consequently how you interact with the world. Much love.